Everyone kept telling me the same thing. You're grown. You can handle it. And for a long time, I believed that was a compliment. But here's what no one says out loud when people decide you're strong enough. They also decide it's okay to take things away from you, especially the things meant to protect your child's future. One legal decision forced me to choose between keeping family peace or telling a truth that would burn it down. Stay with me. If this hits close to home, like, share, and subscribe. You're not alone in this. I grew up in a small coastal town on the West Coast, the kind of place where everyone knows your car before they know your name. People smile at you at the market. They ask about your mom. They ask about your kid. And they remember everything. The Hales were one of those families people talked about like they were a local landmark. My mother, Margaret Hale, wasn't loud. She didn't have to be. She had a way of walking into a room and making it feel like she owned the air. In our family, there was an unspoken rule. The strong one takes care of themselves. The soft one gets taken care of. No one ever said it out loud. It was just understood. Emily, my little sister, was the soft one. She always had a reason things were hard. She was going through something. She was finding herself. She was just sensitive. If Emily missed rent, my mom covered it. If Emily quit a job, my mom called it a fresh start. If Emily needed a new car, my mom somehow found a way. And people in town would nod and say, "Margaret is such a good mother." I was the strong one. I was the one who never needed anything. Or at least, I never admitted that I did. I worked 2 jobs when Lily was little. I learned how to patch up my own mistakes without calling anyone to rescue me. When my mom looked at me, she didn't see a daughter. She saw a problem that could solve itself. So she gave me speeches instead of help. "You're smart, Claire. You'll figure it out. You've always been independent." They sounded like compliments. They weren't. They were assignments. And I carried them like they were normal. By the time Lily was in high school, I was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. But I kept going, because there was one thing I refused to leave to chance. Her future. I started putting money aside early, not in a jar, not in a shoebox. I mean real planning, real discipline, small deposits that turned into bigger ones, extra shifts, tax refunds, side work I didn't tell anyone about. I didn't talk about it much. In my family, talking about something good you built was like putting a target on it. So I kept it quiet. I just called it the education fund when I had to label it. A simple phrase, clean, practical. My mom knew it existed, but only in the way she knew everything, like it was part of the landscape. And at first, it felt safe to have her involved. Not because I trusted her with my dreams, because in this town, people treat paperwork like it's sacred. If your name is on something, it's real. If your name isn't, you don't exist. So when my mother insisted we set things up the right way, I didn't fight her. I told myself it was just a formality, a protective move. I told myself she wanted to help, and I believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative. Lily was 17 when she started talking about leaving town. Really leaving, not just driving 2 hours to the next city. I'm talking about dorms, campus tours, a life that didn't revolve around tides and tourist seasons. I'd watch her scroll through school websites at the kitchen table, and I'd feel something warm in my chest. Not pride. Something quieter. Relief. Like maybe all those years of holding it together actually meant something. Then Emily got engaged. And my mother's whole energy shifted. Suddenly, every conversation was about family. Every phone call ended with, "We need to come together for this." I didn't think much of it at first, because in our family, Emily's milestones were treated like community events, and mine were treated like personal hobbies. But I remember one night, standing in my kitchen, holding my phone, listening to my mother talk about wedding plans. She sounded happy, almost light, and before she hung up, she said, "Don't worry, Claire. You always land on your feet." I stared at the wall after the call ended. Because that rule again, the strong one doesn't get protected. The strong one gets used to falling and calling it grace. If you were me, would you hear that and feel comfort? Or would you feel the warning underneath it at first? I thought the problem was money. That's the word everyone reacts to. Money feels concrete, measurable, easy to argue about. But the longer I sat with it, the more I realized money wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the excuse. The real problem was a sentence I'd heard my entire life. "She'll be fine. She can handle it." I heard it when I moved out early. I heard it when I became a mom. I heard it every time I didn't ask for help. And every time someone said it, something else quietly disappeared. Concern, protection, responsibility. There's a strange thing that happens when you're the reliable one. People stop checking on you, not because they don't care, but because your strength makes them comfortable. They tell themselves you don't need anything, and that thought lets them sleep at night. I didn't notice it while it was happening. I was too busy proving them right. When Lily was younger, I worked late and came home exhausted. I'd heat leftovers and eat standing up at the counter. Some nights, the fridge was almost empty. I told myself that was temporary. I told myself I was building something. And when my mother would say, "You're doing great, Claire, you don't need help," I nodded. Because arguing felt pointless. Because being seen as capable felt safer than being seen as needy. But capability comes with a cost. Once people decide you can carry weight, they start adding more to your arms, quietly, casually, until one day, you're holding things that were never meant to be yours alone. That's when I started noticing the pattern. Emily struggled, and the family gathered around her. I succeeded, and the family stepped back. If Emily fell, it was a crisis. If I fell, it was a lesson. And no one ever asked if that was fair. They just called it balance. There's a name for this. I learned later. Confusing endurance with independence. Mistaking silence for consent. Assuming that, because someone hasn't broken yet, they never will. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late one night, papers spread out in front of me. Account statements. Notes I'd scribbled to myself. Numbers that told a story I hadn't wanted to read. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Don't stress so much." She wrote, "You've always figured things out." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, because that sentence wasn't reassurance. It was a withdrawal. It meant she felt justified stepping back. It meant my ability to cope had become permission for her to stop protecting what mattered. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about trusting me. It was about avoiding responsibility. Calling someone strong can be a way to disappear from their life without looking cruel. It sounds kind. It sounds supportive. But it leaves you alone when the consequences show up. I thought about Lily then. About how she watched me handle everything without complaint. About the way she learned to apologize for wanting things. About how often she said, "It's okay, Mom, I don't need that," even when I knew she did. That's when the fear replaced the anger. Because this wasn't stopping with me. If I stayed quiet, Lily would learn the same rule. Be capable. Be quiet. Don't ask. Let people take what they need, and call it maturity. I closed the folder and pushed it aside. My hands were shaking, but not from panic, from clarity. For the first time, I wasn't asking. How do I fix this? I was asking. Why was this allowed to happen in the first place? And a harder question followed. If being strong enough meant losing protection, what would it teach my daughter to become? If you were me, sitting there in that quiet kitchen, would you still call that strength? Or would you finally call it what it was, abandonment with better branding? It happened on a Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No warning. Lily was sitting on the floor with her laptop open, brochures scattered around her like fallen leaves. I was at the sink, rinsing a mug I'd forgotten to drink from. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Mom," she said, "careful. I've been thinking." That tone always meant she'd already decided something. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. She told me she didn't think leaving town made sense anymore, said housing was expensive, said student loans were scary, said she could work at one of the hotels by the marina, maybe move up fast. She said it all very calmly, like she was listing groceries. I asked her what changed. She shrugged. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. That word hit harder than anything else she could have said. Burden? I looked at her screen. The tabs were still open. Campuses she'd bookmarked months ago. Programs she'd been excited about. Nothing was deleted yet. Just paused. She kept talking. About staying close. About helping out. About being realistic. She said, "You've done enough for me." I nodded while she spoke. I always nodded. But my chest felt tight, and I couldn't tell if it was anger or fear, because I'd heard those sentences before. Not from her. From me. I remembered being her age, standing in my childhood bedroom, telling my mother I'd figured it out, that I didn't need help, that I'd be fine. I remembered the relief on her face when I said it, like she'd been released from a responsibility she didn't know how to carry. Lily closed her laptop and hugged her knees. She looked small like that, not weak, just careful. I noticed how she avoided eye contact, how she framed her dreams like inconveniences, how she offered herself up as the solution to problems no one had asked her to solve. That's when the anger drained out of me, and something colder took its place. Fear, because this wasn't just about a school choice. This was about a lesson being passed down quietly. If you want less conflict, want less disappointment, want people to stay calm around you, ask for less, need less, dream smaller. I sat down on the floor across from her. My legs were stiff. I was tired in a way that lived in my bones. I asked her if she actually wanted to stay. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she said, "It's fine." That answer scared me more than a no would have, because "it's fine" was how I'd survived my whole life. I walked to the fridge later that night. It was mostly empty. A half carton of eggs, leftover rice, a bottle of water. I stared at it longer than necessary. That fridge had been empty before, many times, and I'd always told myself it was temporary. That sacrifice was noble, that holding back now would pay off later. But looking at Lily's closed laptop, I saw the consequence. Not someday. Now. Silence has a way of teaching children what adults refuse to say out loud. It teaches them to be grateful for less, to apologize for wanting more, to measure their worth by how little space they take up. I went back into the living room. Lily was scrolling on her phone. I asked her if anyone had told her she shouldn't aim higher. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I just thought it made sense." That was the worst part. No one had forced her. She'd absorbed the rule on her own. Be strong, be flexible. Don't expect too much. I told her she didn't have to decide anything yet. She smiled, relieved, too relieved. And that's when I knew this wasn't something I could ignore anymore, because if I stayed quiet, this wouldn't end with me. It would shape her choices, her limits, her future. I sat there that night, listening to the waves outside, the same sound I'd grown up with. I thought about how easy it is to mistake shrinking for maturity, how often we call surrender being practical. And I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask before. If my daughter was already learning to disappear for the sake of peace, what would my silence teach her next? I stopped asking myself when it started. That question didn't help anymore. What mattered was understanding how it worked. Because once I looked closely, I saw that this wasn't about money being spent. It was about money being used. In my family, money had never been discussed openly. It moved quietly, through favors, through timing, through who got help first. My mother never handed anyone cash and called it control. She called it generosity. If Emily needed help, my mom stepped in before anyone asked. If I struggled, my mom waited to see if I'd manage. And when I did, she smiled like the system was working. I used to think that meant she trusted me. I was wrong. She trusted the pattern. Money, in her hands, wasn't security. It was leverage. It let her decide who stayed close and who learned to cope alone. I noticed it in the smallest moments. The way she'd sigh before helping Emily, just loud enough for people to hear. The way she'd remind everyone, later, of how much she'd done, not angrily. Almost proudly, like a ledger only she could read. When she talked about family, it always sounded warm, but the warmth came with conditions: gratitude, compliance, silence. And the people who paid the highest price were the ones who didn't push back, the ones who absorbed discomfort quietly. I replayed our last few conversations in my head. Her tone never changed. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She laughed. That laugh stayed with me, not because it was loud, because it was effortless, like nothing inside her had been disturbed. That's when I stopped wondering if this was about greed. Greed is messy. Greed looks nervous. This wasn't that. This was certainty. She was certain she had the right, certain that what she decided would stand, certain that if I was upset, I'd get over it, because I always had. In our town, people admired her. They said she was generous. They said she kept the family together. They said she always showed up. And in a way, she did. Just not equally. Power like that doesn't announce itself. It hides behind good intentions, behind tradition, behind phrases like "I know what's best." I saw how it worked in public, at gatherings. She sat at the center. People leaned in when she spoke. When she offered help, it came with a story attached, a reminder of who made it possible, and no one questioned it. Because questioning her meant risking her favor. And in a small community, favor is currency. I started to understand something that scared me. The money wasn't taken impulsively. It was redirected, moved from one future to another. From a child who didn't complain to an adult who still depended. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. And choices like that don't happen in isolation. They're rehearsed. They're reinforced. They're rewarded. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my frustration to keep things calm. All the times I'd told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I'd mistaken peace for safety. But peace, in that system, only existed as long as I stayed quiet. The moment silence threatened control, consequences appeared. Not dramatic ones, subtle ones. Cold shoulders, changed plans, laughter where concern should have been. That's when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could clear up with a conversation. This was a structure. And I was standing outside it now, alone. I sat at my table with my notebook open, writing down dates, amounts, messages I hadn't wanted to screenshot before. Each line felt heavier than the last, not because of what it proved, but because of what it meant. That my mother hadn't just failed to protect my child. She had decided my child's future was negotiable, and she felt comfortable doing it. That comfort terrified me, because people who are comfortable crossing lines rarely stop on their own. They stop when the consequences arrive. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on it. If you were me, what would you call that? A mistake. A misunderstanding or a system that finally revealed itself when I stopped playing my role. I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew one thing. If money was power in my family, then silence was consent. And I was done giving both. The next morning, I didn't go to my mother's house. Not yet. I went to the credit union. It was the same building I'd walked into for years, the same faded brochures, the same bell over the door, the kind of place where the teller knows your birthday without checking your ID. That day, I was sweating through my shirt anyway. I sat across from a woman named Denise. She had kind eyes and a tidy desk. I told her I needed to review the education fund. I kept my voice steady. I didn't say stolen. I didn't say betrayal. I just asked for the activity. Denise clicked around, frowned softly, then turned her monitor slightly so I could see. A list of transactions. Bigger ones than I'd ever made. Transfers that didn't match anything I recognized. And there, plain as a street sign, was the authorization history. My mother's name. Not as a contact, as someone with access. Denise leaned back like she was bracing for my reaction. It looks like she was permitted, she said carefully. Permitted. I repeated. The word landed wrong, like a coat buttoned on the wrong side. I asked if that meant it was legal. Denise didn't answer right away. She pulled a file, flipped through it, then pointed to a line with her pen. On paper, it was clean. 2 names, 2 signatures, 2 people with rights. It's valid, she said. Valid. Permitted. Legal. Every word sounded like a locked door. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there, staring at the screen, because I could feel what was about to happen next. Not in the account, in the story. If I walked out of that building and screamed thief, people would hear family dispute. If I called the police and said my mom took money, they would ask, was she authorized? And if the answer was yes, the conversation would end before it even started. That was the first time I understood something most people learn too late. There's a gap between what is wrong and what is punishable. And that gap is where people like my mother get comfortable. I left the credit union with a folder in my hands. Denise had printed what she could. Dates, amounts, confirmation codes. She offered a sympathetic look like she wanted to say more, but couldn't. Outside, the sun was too bright. The ocean air smelled normal. People were walking their dogs like nothing in the world had shifted. I sat in my car and didn't start it. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I wasn't going anywhere. Because in that moment, I had 2 choices. Do the thing everyone would tell me to do. Call the police. Make noise. Demand justice right now. Or do the thing that felt slow and unfair. Hold my anger. Build a case. Gather evidence. I could already hear the comments in my head. Why are you waiting? Why are you being nice? If it was me, I'd have her arrested. I understood that instinct. It's satisfying. It feels clean. But clean isn't always real. Here's the part nobody likes to admit. When paperwork gives someone access, Calling it theft out loud doesn't automatically make the system agree with you. If I stormed into a station with pure emotion, I'd leave with a shrug. And my mother would go home confident, laughing at how dramatic I was. So I did something that didn't feel like relief. I made a plan. I went home, spread everything on the table, and opened my notebook. I wrote down dates like I was documenting a crime scene. I saved screenshots of messages. I searched my email for anything that proved intent, anything that showed what that money was for. Because if I was going to hold someone accountable, I couldn't just tell my story. I had to prove it. And while I was doing that, the town started doing what small towns do. They talked. Emily's wedding plans were everywhere. The florist, the marina, the dress shop. People asked me how excited I was. People asked if Lily would be a bridesmaid. People asked where I was sitting. I smiled and said, "We'll see," because I didn't know yet what I was allowed to say, or what would be used against me that night. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, a simple one. "You're overthinking," she wrote. "Everything is fine." Fine. That word again. I stared at it, and I felt something harden in my chest, because I finally understood the game. If she could keep it fine, she could keep it quiet. If she could keep it quiet, there would be no consequences. I set my phone down and kept writing. If you were me, would you choose the quick satisfaction of a phone call? Or the slow, ugly work of building evidence that can't be laughed off, Lily? There's something I need you to hear, not as your mom trying to fix things. Just as the person who has watched you learn how to shrink without anyone ever teaching you the word for it. I saw it in the way you said, "It's fine." I saw it when you closed your laptop like your dreams were something you could fold up and put away. I saw it when you told me you didn't want to be a burden. And I want you to know this. Your dream was never the problem. You were never the problem. You do not have to become smaller to make other people's mistakes feel more comfortable. When you said, "I can just stay here," I didn't hear a plan. I heard a kid trying to survive disappointment by lowering the ceiling on her own life. That's what children do when adults fail them. They adapt. They adjust. They pretend they didn't want it that badly. Because wanting something and not getting it hurts too much. But Lily, if you learn that lesson now, if you learn that the right response to betrayal is to reduce yourself, then you will spend the rest of your life making room for people who never deserved a seat at your table. You are not responsible for keeping peace when peace is built on silence. You are not responsible for understanding things that were never okay. People like to call that maturity. It's not. It's training. It's teaching you to accept consequences you didn't create. And I need you to understand something else. You've watched me handle everything. You've watched me smile through stress. You've watched me say it's okay when it wasn't. And I'm sorry for that. Not because I meant to teach you the wrong lesson, but because I did. I taught you that love means enduring. That being good means being quiet. That strength means not needing anything. And that is not the kind of strength I want for you. I want you to have the kind of strength that asks for what you deserve. The kind that keeps your spine straight even when someone calls you dramatic for having boundaries. The kind that doesn't confuse survival with success. I don't know how this ends yet. I don't know what we'll get back, and what we won't. I do know this. I would rather you see me fight for you than watch you learn to surrender. Because one day, you're going to sit across from someone who tells you, "You'll be fine, you can handle it." And it will sound familiar. It will feel like love. And that's when you'll need to remember the difference. Being capable doesn't mean you're disposable. Being strong enough doesn't give anyone the right to touch your future. Not your grandmother. Not anyone. If the people who are supposed to protect you choose to look away, you don't have to make it easier for them. You don't have to make their failure feel gentle. You get to name what happened. You get to keep your dream. You get to take up space. So listen to me. Do not trade your life for someone else's comfort. Do not shrink your plans to fit inside other people's wrong choices. From this moment on, there's a rule in our home. No one gets to gamble with your future, no matter what last name they share. The wedding took place at the marina, just as the sun was going down. White lights strung between the boats, music loud enough to drown out thought. People smiling like nothing in the world could touch them tonight. I stood near the back, holding my phone, feeling strangely calm. No shaking, no anger, just wait. Emily laughed at something Noah said. Margaret moved through the crowd like a host who owned the night. People stopped her to hug her, to thank her, to tell her how generous she was. I watched them clap. I waited. When the time came for speeches, the coordinator handed me the microphone without a second look. I wasn't on the program, but no one questioned it. In small towns, people assume things belong where they stand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say names. I tapped the small bell wired to the LED screen behind the stage. The music cut. The screen lit up. A timeline appeared. Clean. Simple. Dates. Amounts. Transfers. I heard chairs shift. I said I wasn't here to ruin a celebration. I said I just wanted to clarify something that had been misunderstood for a long time. The first slide showed the education investment account. Opened years ago, purpose listed clearly, not vague, not implied. Education. Then came the withdrawals, large ones, connected directly to invoices, boat rental, catering, lighting, deposits. The room got quiet in a way that wasn't dramatic, just stunned. Margaret stood frozen. Her smile didn't disappear. It hardened. I moved to the next slide. Messages, screenshots, a family group chat. Dates highlighted. Don't worry, Claire's fine. She can handle it. Someone whispered. I kept going. I showed the contract. The signature, authorized, legal. I said the word everyone was thinking before they could say it out loud. Legal. Then I paused, and I showed them something else. A letter, an old email. Years ago, long before Lily was born. An acceptance notice, a scholarship offer, full tuition, then another message. Be realistic. We need that money right now. I let that sit. That was the moment the air changed. Not because of the money, because people realized this wasn't new. This was a pattern. I said nothing about betrayal. I said nothing about abuse. I just showed consequences. Emily started crying, not loudly, quiet, embarrassed tears. Noah stared at the ground. Thomas looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 minute. Margaret finally spoke. She said I was airing private family matters. I nodded. I said private problems become public when they're paid for with someone else's future. No one clapped. No one yelled. That's what surprised me most. People just looked away. I stepped off the stage and sat down. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. If you're wondering why I did it there, in front of everyone, ask yourself this. If you were me, how many closed doors would you knock on before you stopped asking politely? How many quiet conversations would you try before you realized silence was protecting the wrong person? That night, I didn't destroy a family. I documented one. And once the evidence was on the screen, no one could pretend they hadn't seen it. The applause never came back, but neither did the lies. And for the first time, that felt like enough. After that night, people kept asking me how I felt. They expected anger, or relief, or some kind of victory speech. What I felt was quiet, The kind of quiet that comes after you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Not dramatic, just final. I went home alone. The house was dark. Lily was asleep. The refrigerator hummed. That was it. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook. Not to vent, not to cry. To write. Dates. Times. Names. Transfers. Messages. I wrote because I didn't want the story to float anymore. I didn't want it softened by memory or rewritten by someone else's version. That's when it became clear to me. Feelings don't survive contact with systems. I had tried feelings first. I had tried explaining. I had tried being calm. I had tried being understanding. I had tried being the bigger person. Every time, the response was the same. This is complicated. This is family. Let's not make it worse. My emotions were treated like noise, something to manage, something to wait out. But when I put the evidence on the table, the tone changed. No one told me to calm down. No one asked me to be patient. No one suggested we talk about it later. The room didn't argue with me. It adjusted. That's the part people don't like to admit. In family conflicts, emotions are real, but they're weak. Not because they don't matter, but because they're easy to dismiss. They can be reframed as exaggeration, as sensitivity, as drama. Evidence doesn't bend like that. Evidence doesn't need to be understood. It just needs to exist. Once the truth has form documents, timestamps, paper trails, it stops being a story. It becomes a record, and systems only respond to records. I realized that night wasn't about humiliating anyone. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice in the emotional sense. It was about ending denial, giving the truth a body. That's why the screen mattered, why the contracts mattered, why the messages mattered. Not because they were cold, because they were stable. People often ask me why I didn't just trust that doing the right thing would work out. Why I didn't assume good intentions, why I didn't give more grace. Here's what I learned. Good intentions don't protect futures. Structures do. Love is not a strategy when power is uneven. Hope is not a plan when money is involved. And silence is not peace when it only benefits one side. I learned that being alone emotionally is painful, but being alone without proof is dangerous. Before the evidence, I was alone in my version of the truth. After the evidence, I wasn't. Once the documents existed, the conversation changed. It stopped being about how everyone felt and started being about what actually happened. That's when consequences enter the room, not because people suddenly care more, because they have to. Systems don't respond to pain. They respond to clarity. They respond when the truth is written down in a way that can't be ignored or rewritten. If you're watching this and thinking, but my situation isn't that extreme, ask yourself something. If you were me, how long would you rely on being understood before you realized understanding wasn't enough? How many times would you explain yourself before you noticed nothing was changing? I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was angrier. I didn't win because I was morally right. I won because I stopped asking to be believed and started showing what happened. That shift changed everything. Because once the truth has evidence, it no longer depends on your energy, your tone, or your endurance. It stands on its own. And once consequences exist, the argument ends. That isn't cruelty. That isn't bitterness. That's clarity. And clarity is what finally broke the cycle. The morning Lily left, the town looked exactly the same. The harbor lights were still on. Fishing boats rocked gently like they always had. The cafe on the corner unlocked its door at 6. Same routine. Same smell of burnt coffee and salt in the air. Neighbors waved without slowing down. Life didn't pause for anyone, but inside our house, everything had shifted. Lily moved through the rooms quietly, like she was afraid of taking up space. She folded her clothes with careful hands, lined her books into neat stacks, checked her list again even though she'd memorized it days ago. She didn't ask for help. She never did. That habit didn't come from confidence. It came from learning early that needing less made life easier for everyone else. I stood in the hallway pretending to scroll on my phone, watching her zip the suitcase. I noticed how she flinched when the zipper caught, how she apologized to no one in particular, how she kept saying, "It's fine. I've got it." Those words landed heavier than anything shouted during the weeks before. Too calm, too practiced, too familiar. At the door, she hugged me longer than usual, not dramatic, no tears, just firm, like she was trying to memorize the shape of home before stepping away from it. That was when it finally clicked. What I had fought wasn't just about money, it was about time, about stopping a lesson before it hardened into her bones. After the night at the marina, I didn't confront anyone again. I didn't send long messages. I didn't explain my reasoning or wait for understanding. I just stepped back. Low contact isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or burn bridges. It's quiet boundaries, unreturned calls, short replies, fewer holidays, less access. And yes, people noticed. They always do when you stop being useful. They said I was cold. They said I was dramatic. They said I was tearing the family apart. I listened. I nodded. I didn't defend myself. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood. I finally understood. I wasn't breaking a family. I was breaking a pattern. The pattern where the strongest one absorbs the damage. The pattern where you can handle it becomes permission. The pattern where silence is mistaken for strength. The pattern where the most responsible person is expected to sacrifice again and again. That pattern didn't start with me, and if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't end with me either. People like to say family is everything, but family without boundaries isn't love. It's a system. A system that keeps working because the same person keeps paying the price. I didn't hate anyone. I didn't need revenge. I just stopped shrinking. If you're watching this and you've ever been called mature for your age, or the reliable one, or strong enough to deal with it, I want you to pause. Really pause. Ask yourself who benefited from you being strong. Ask yourself who got to rest while you carried more. If you were me, how long would you keep proving you're fine before you noticed the cost? How many chances would you give before you realized that peace bought with silence isn't peace at all? Lily didn't leave town to escape her family. She left, knowing she didn't have to earn protection by being quiet. That's the difference. She left knowing her future wasn't something other people could negotiate away. And that's when I knew the cycle had actually broken. Not because anyone apologized. Not because everyone agreed. Not because the past was fixed. But because the next generation didn't have to repeat it. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've been labeled independent when what you really needed was support, you're not imagining it. And you're not wrong. You're not selfish for setting boundaries. You're not cruel for choosing distance. You're not destroying anything by protecting what matters. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't holding a family together at all costs. It's refusing to pass the damage on. That's not destruction. That's repair.